I've been delighted and thrilled to be here at SFA, and I just want to thank you so much. You welcomed me to your classes. I've had lunch and dinner with a number of the students and teachers, and I'm leaving Nacogdoches much more informed about your wonderful history and the incredible university that you attend and your future that you're going to have. Of course, I also love that your color is purple, because I'm from Baltimore and the Ravens won this week, so I was thrilled to be surrounded by purple all week, so thank you very much. I also loved your athletic facility. I learned that the students voted and taxed yourself to get that athletic facility, and I was able to use it, so thank you very much for that. I was given a number of questions that you're interested in, and I'm just going to read the areas of topics that you might talk about, and then if I don't cover something that you'd like me to cover, please raise your hand and I'll answer it, okay? How's that sound? Or do you have a better way? I don't know, you might. I'm a star, but you know one of the things that a star does? A really good performer, this is what I've learned, that doesn't mean I do it well, is to read an audience and to find out what your audience wants. So that's what. So let me just give you the topics that I've heard that you're interested in, and then could you just raise your hand in case I didn't follow a topic that I might not have covered, and then I'll try to cover it, and then we'll ask specific questions. Education, healthcare, energy, India and China, and any other issues that I want to focus on for my own self. Anything else you're interested in? Yes? 24/7 media. Well, okay, great. Yeah, I know, 24/7 news media. Anything else? Religion? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Role of clergy and social justice. Okay, that's sort of like religion. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to start off with a religion because I wrote a book about that and I thought it'd be interesting, and then I'll go on to a few other topics, okay? And please raise your hand at any point if you have anything to say, because what I've learned about, and this is true with me, I hate listening to people for a long period of time. It kind of gets boring. So if you want to interact, you're welcome to do that, okay? Does that sound good? So the issue with religion, as some of you know, how many of you were in my class, in the lunch that I did about religion? Oh, good. So none of you come back. What does that mean? So I wrote a book called Failing America's Faithful, and I wrote that book because I had grown up in a family, as you know, a Catholic family, and I'd seen that my faith and the faith of my family had allowed us to fight for social justice, and so I thought that religion was a place that, you know, made it clear that we should fight for social justice. I had seen Reverend Martin Luther King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy fight for civil rights during the 60s, and I had seen during the Vietnam War the Berrigan brothers, Sister Corita, Father Coffin, Reverend Coffin, fight for against the war, as well as Reverend Martin Luther King. So I'd always seen that social justice had a religious underpinning, at least in our country. And yet I was disturbed that over the last 30 years it seemed that the Christian right had tried to capture God and had shrunk God and focused on three issues: abortion, same-sex marriage, and stem cell research. Each of those are important issues, but they didn't seem to be the biggest issues that we could focus on, and they had really shrunk God to three little issues. And that seemed wrong to me. At the same time, I was upset with my own progressive movement, who had said, get religion out of politics. And I thought that was the wrong thing. I thought the better answer is to get the correct religion into politics, the religions of people like Reverend Martin Luther King or Sister Corita or the Berrigan brothers. And therefore, I wrote this history. And I'll give you an example of why I thought that the Christian right, and I know I'm in the Bible Belt, so I assume that not everybody agrees with what I just said. Do you want to acknowledge that you agree with me? Do you want to be quiet about it? I'm just curious what's going on. I like a little reaction. But for instance, when my father, Robert Kennedy, went to South Africa in 1966, he was told, he said, you know, it's wrong that blacks in South Africa are told where to live, taken away from their families, told where to work, have no freedom at all. And he was told, as were people during the South or before the Civil War, well, God allows slavery, and God, you read about slavery in the Bible, so this is perfectly in line with our religion. And my father thought, how could he touch that argument? And he said, just think about this. What would happen if you die and you go up to heaven and you go through those pearly gates, and suppose when you get there, suppose God is black? That was something that those white students had never thought about. They had created God in their own image, which is traditionally what we do. I remember growing up, and God, you know, looked like, you know, an Irish American. And if you go to Italy, he looks Italian. And if you go to, you know. So what it taught me, and that suppose God is black, is that God is larger than any of us. And God should not be created in our own image. We should understand that we're all the children of God, and therefore we should care about all sorts of things, including social justice. So when somebody asks what is the role of the clergy to do well would be fighting for social justice. That's what I think. Anybody want to okay, so I'm going to end my comments on religion there, unless anybody wants to say. Oh, I have another story. And then, go ahead. Did you want to say something? Of course. Do I think social justice includes the environment? Yes. In fact, a number of the Christian right believe in creation care. Because they said God created the earth and we should care about the environment. Absolutely. St. Francis, at least in the Catholic Church, was a great environmentalist. And the Pope, again, if you're Catholic, talks eloquently about protecting the environment. Now I'm going to tell you a story. Yes?
Do you think, going off of kind of Kelly's thesis and then this southernization of American Protestantism, do you think that progressive religion, Christianity, is going to grow in America? Or do you think that this conservative religion is going to continue to grow in America?
Can you hear me now?
I could hear you before.
Okay.
You spoke very well and very articulately, and I could. What do I think is going to happen to conservative religion?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think it's going to shrink. And why do I think it's going to shrink? It's already, first of all, with gay rights. Young people believe in gay rights. I mean, not maybe everybody here, but that's the trajectory of history, and so you could see that the Christian Coalition is not pushing the gay rights amendments anymore. Number one. Two, you asked about creation care. The head of the evangelicals is very much in favor of the environment. So the younger Christian right, I mean, they still may, and I can understand that, have very strong opinions about abortion. But other parts, they are very much in line with a much more progressive movement. And I think that's what's happening. So that's exciting. And that's why I wrote about religion, because I've seen, if you look at American history, religion often starts off as being narrow and unprogressive, and then it grows. Because God is large. God created us. He doesn't want us to, or she, doesn't want us to. I mean, God is, you know, we may, anyway, moving right along. Okay. Does anybody else want to say it? I could tell the story of Rick Warren. Do any of you know who Rick Warren is? Then I won't tell the story. Okay. Anybody else want to talk about something, and I'll move on to something else? Okay. So let's just go to education, because one of the questions I received was, with the higher cost of education and the fact that there's so much student debt, is higher education worth it? Does somebody remember that kind of question? And the answer, and what should students do about it? Well, what students should do about it is they should go to Austin and they should lobby. And they should say that we need to reduce the cost of higher education. Because for the good of this country, we need as many young people to go into college and get good educations as possible. Somebody else asked, and I'll get into this a little later, about what's going on with India and China. As many of you know, India and China are growing from year to year at about 8 to 10% GDP. That's a fast growth. And what they're focused on is education, and what's called STEM, science, technology, and engineering, and math. And the people who are going to be the powerful countries of the 21st century are those who are going to be good at science, technology, engineering, and math. That's what's the truth. So if you want a strong nation, what you should do as a government is you should invest in students who are going to study these things, and you should make it easy for them to go to college, and you should make sure that they are not in debt. And unfortunately, that is not what the policies of the state or federal government have been, although I think Obama has changed the student debt situation so the banks aren't making money off of you, which they were making a lot of money off of you, and making sure that you have a much more reasonable cost. Let me give you the difference. In Europe, in Denmark, where my daughter went as an exchange student, she's in college, she's about to graduate, college is free. Free. In fact, they pay kids to go to college. Why? Because they think education is important, not just for that individual, but for the whole nation. And as a result, Denmark is booming. The Denmark krona is much stronger than the American dollar because they're just doing really well because they have focused on education. So we have got our priorities wrong, and this is not an individual problem. It is a social problem. And I suggest that you guys rent 5 buses and go to Austin and tell them what you think. Come on! That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. Yes? Yes, what would you say? Okay, now I have a few questions based on that little comment, or big comment. Yes, go ahead.
Well, obviously education is an important role in our lives, but what do you do for the children that have a much more difficult time learning at a higher education level? Not everybody is cut out for college. What do you do for those children?
Well, there are in Maryland, for instance, I love being able to boast about my state, which probably doesn't go over well in Texas. But, we have vocational schools that have higher standards than some of our colleges. So not everybody, when you say everybody needs to go to college, absolutely, not everybody's going to be good at science, technology, engineering, math, but they can certainly learn to work with their hands. If you're a good car mechanic right now, you're making, at least in Maryland, $80,000 or $90,000. I don't know if that's true here, but you're making good money. So what my answer is, you should have good other schools. But you should have education so people are going to learn. If they don't have that education, if they can't be maybe they don't want to go to college and learn STEM, but if they're not going to learn to be a car mechanic or something like that, they're just going to be screwed. They're going to be hurt. And Germany, for instance, when they were faced with this issue, they put millions and millions and millions of dollars into education of people who weren't going to college, and as a result, they had one of the best manufacturing industries in the world, and they're exporting. And as you know, if you look at what's going on in Europe, Germany is by far the richest country in Europe. as a larger country. Now, Denmark's rich too, because they figured out whether you're going to be in higher, go to college or other types. So basically, education. What kind of education is important, but we've got to do a much better job in the United States in doing STEM. Yes?
With such an emphasis internationally on the hard sciences like engineering and science, what do you think the role of the more soft sciences like sociology or even the humanities could have in a world where so much money is going into science, technology, engineering, or mathematics?
Well, first of all, a lot of money goes into those because you need labs. And I mean, I'm actually, you didn't hear that I was chair of the Institute for Human Virology, and we need labs. I mean, we're studying viruses. We treat 700,000 AIDS patients in Africa, and we need the labs to do it. So that's why more money goes in there. But I think the role of sociology is very important in terms of learning how to talk to people. I mean, we have a very, I love this group of students. You're from different cultures, and if you look at the whole United States, it's even more diverse than SFA. And so what sociology should teach us is help us develop our emotional intelligence and our understanding of people and an understanding of how we talk to people. And in some places, you should look people in the eye. Like I grew up where, when I was taught, my parents, shake the hands, grip hard, look the person in the eye. That's an American idea. In some places, you look people in the eye and they think you're being rude. In some places, you're not supposed to shake the guy's hand. I don't like that very much. But anyway, so you have to learn. So that sociology is very important in teaching us how we can get along with people who come from different cultures. So that's important. Is that an answer that you like, not like? I want to know how improved I am.
One thing that I heard about is that with a higher education system, one of the major goals is to make a more rounded individual, someone who is not just narrowing themselves to a very narrow field. So one thing I worry about with such an emphasis on these 4 areas is that the idea of college being a think tank for social issues or to create new social justice or to create solutions to social problems might fall by the wayside if our money's pouring into something that's basically just going to make this country more money.
That's a very good point. I don't think that's going to happen. Those sociology departments are very powerful, and they'll fight back, and as well they should. And really, our deficits on STEM are so dramatic. I mean, I don't know here at SFA, but if you look at how most American colleges are focused on, they're not on the STEM. They really aren't. And so we could do a much better job. We are way behind. So I think we're trying to catch up. So you hear the attention on that, but I don't think that's, in fact, what people are studying. I could be wrong, but that's my experience. That's because when I look at how many engineers are in the United States, how many American students are studying engineering? Very few. Mostly the engineers that we produce in our PhD programs come from abroad. Very few come from the United States. So I don't think that's the biggest problem. Yes?
You said that sociology basically teaches you how to speak to people and, understand other cultures and stuff. Do you think that people that are in the sociology field should go to their government and try to get it to be taught into public schools, into the secondary education? Because as you're younger, you learn better.
Yes.
And so if you were to learn about other cultures, about how to speak to people, especially with our generation and all of the technology, do you think that that should be something?
Yeah, I think that, and I do think, I think that absolutely. And I think a lot of, in Maryland, in Montgomery County, just in the county, we have, in one elementary school, 117 different countries represented. 170. Do you know how difficult it is to teach 107 kids from 117 different countries? It's huge. So we're doing that already. It depends really where you are. I mean, in Maryland, we have, and in parts of California, huge diverse populations. I don't know if that's true in Nacogdoches, for instance. So you might not need it as much here, but certainly we need it in Maryland. Yes?
You say that funding for STEM courses is necessary to help sustain a country's economy. How do you feel about fine arts programs? Because I know a lot of public schools are defunding fine arts programs, art, music, theater.
I think they're very important. In fact, Maryland, don't you think it's so obnoxious of me? I'm so sorry. But in Maryland, we require that arts be funded. And one county, Anne Arundel County, tried to defund the arts. And the arts teachers and students sued the county, brought them to court, and went up to the Supreme Court in the state of Maryland. And the Supreme Court said you had to fund the arts programs. That deserves a round of applause, you guys. That's like really good. You're not as enthusiastic as this young man about the arts programs. Arts are really important, and they're important for STEM because a lot of and they're important for our own lives. It opens our hearts and our minds to other ways of thinking about things, and it also there's a lot of talent there. So very, very important, absolutely. And you have, I see, a beautiful fine arts center here. So all of that is critically important too. We have to be well-rounded. We should spend more time in school. I mean, we really should. I don't know why we take 3 months off in the summer. It's just weird. Why? We have so much to learn. Yes. Do you want to keep going on this issue? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's your time. Yes.
I was just wondering, do you think the United States should be throwing more money at education, or do you think they should change their standards and restructure the schools?
Well, I think that there's a lot to learn from other countries about how to do good education. And I think what has happened in education in the United States, it's become a political football between between Republicans and Democrats. And which is other countries look at us and go, what are you talking about? Why don't you train your teachers educate your teachers really well, pay them really well, give them a lot of respect, give them a lot of help when they go into the schools, mentor them, support them, love them, care for them, and you'll be okay. But, I think, and you probably know the statistics better, but about 20% of the students who start leave in the first 5 years of teaching. It might even be higher than that. And why? Because we don't have a system that's set up to do that. And instead, Republicans say we should have charter schools, and Democrats say we should have regular public schools. And we talk at this level rather than the concrete, gritty level of really what makes a good teacher. And so it's much easier to be ideological than to be programmatic. That's what you learn. So people talk. I mean, if you look at all the speeches, they're all at this level. They're not at a very gritty level.
Along those lines, how would you counter the argument that we have a $1 trillion deficit and we can't afford to educate our children? Well, I mean,
we don't have it. Okay, let me give you about the Could I have my coffee, please?
Please counter the deficit argument.
Okay, let me give you a deal about the deficit. I'm going to give you my views about the deficit. First of all, I love that you have Starbucks. So thank you. So this is the deal. How do we get a deficit? We get a deficit because we don't put enough money into the government and we spend money. Those are the two ways you get a deficit, right? We now have the lowest tax collections ever in the last 60 years. Did you know that? Who knew that? About 40% of the students. So when you're talking about the lowest tax collections, part of the things you have to do is raise the taxes and be normal like we were 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But of course we're going to have a deficit when we have a growing elderly population and we're collecting fewer taxes than we ever have in 60 years. This is before World War II we're collecting fewer taxes. It makes no sense. So that's the first answer. The second answer is, in fact, President Obama has cut a lot in government. You could see that the Medicare, I don't know if you saw the Medicare drug costs were down significantly last year if you read yesterday's newspaper, because, unlike the Republicans, the Democrats believe that you should negotiate with the drug companies and say, if we're going to give you hundreds of billions of dollars in business, you should give us a discount. The Republicans under George Bush didn't do that. Every state does that. If you run a business and you're going to have a huge number of, you're going to buy a lot of products, you usually get a discount. Do the Republicans do that? No. You got to listen to me. It's crazy. So really what's going on is that we are not taxing people the way they should be taxed. If you know, Warren Buffett, have you heard of Warren Buffett? Very rich billionaire. He pays a lower percentage of his tax than his secretary. What kind of world do we live in which billionaires pay less tax as a percentage of their income than secretaries? It's wrong. It's unjust. It's not, it's just bad policy, and it's bad for the country. And you've had all these now CEOs of corporations who have said to the Republicans, tax people. We understand it needs to be done. So don't give me about this deficit deal. It's just, you could solve it. And the other big issue of what is causing the deficit, and to be very difficult about it, is that we're growing, as you probably know, you're young, but you probably have parents and grandparents, and they're living longer, and they're getting health care. And the way we spend money on health care makes no sense whatsoever. You understand that, don't you? Raise your hand if you understand that it makes no sense. Great. Why does it make no sense? Because we fund, I mean, the United States, and I've said this before, spends twice as much as our GDP on health care as any other industrialized country in the world. Twice as much. And we get worse results of any of the countries in the world. We have a higher infant mortality rate, and we have a lower longevity rate. Did you know that? How many knew that? Well, now everybody can raise their hand because they've just heard it. So the way we spend money in the United States is nutso. And we should change the way we spend money. And the reason that we don't change the way is because a question that was asked me, which was really a very good question I forgot to answer, is because of the Supreme Court and the Citizens United, which allows the lobbyists to say, well, we need this and we need that. And they don't allow people to develop, and the Congress to develop the best policies, which in Europe, you do not have these huge lobbyists. And that is not funded by the lobbyists, and therefore you can, in parts of Europe, and therefore you can do good policy. But it does not make any sense in the world that we spend twice as much as other people and we don't get better health care. Of course. Why? I mean, it's not only a right, you know, just if it's not only a right, it makes sense for a country. We want to be a strong country. And what happens now, I'll just give you an example of why I like Obamacare. Yesterday, you don't know much about me except that I'm a member of the Kennedy family, but many of you did not know that I was the sewage attorney for the state of Maryland. I also did sludge and sanitary landfills. So when I heard that you had this great biomass plant, I wanted to go out and see what Judy McDonald had accomplished when she was mayor. So I went out to and we were talking to a guy who was about 40 years old, and we said, I think Janice said to him, "Did you go to college?" And he was a very smart young man, or, well, 40 to me is young. And he looked down and he said, "I went to 2 years of college, and then I had a child, and she was 1.5 pounds. And I couldn't go to college because I had to pay all her health care costs." So for 20 years, he's been paying off the health care costs for his child. And it means that the United States missed the opportunity to have a really smart guy go to college and fulfill his potential. He was somebody who wanted to go to college. He was smart, he was bright, but he was stymied because he had to pay his child's health care costs. My daughter just had a baby, and she had the same problem. She had a preeclampsia. Luckily, she has health care, but her health care costs were probably $100,000 because she was so sick, and her baby was going to be so sick. So luckily, she can continue with her career, but he couldn't continue with the career because he didn't have good health care coverage. That's wrong. It's bad, not just for him, it's bad for the country because it means that we're not getting the most skilled people because they're being held back because of the health care. That was kind of a long answer to your question. Thank you. Does anybody else want to talk about health care, or do we want to move on to energy?
I had a question about the education.
Oh, yeah.
And the standardized testing that we're spending so much money on. What is your take on that?
Oh, that's a good question. I like standardized testing. I know that's controversial. And the reason I like standardized testing is because I think that it's really important that all kids learn something basic. And that doesn't mean that you have to do thousands of standardized tests, but it does mean that you have to actually have a baseline of what the kids are going to learn. And I tell you this because I worked in education for 8 years. And I'll tell you, this is a story. I'm warning you. So there was a school in Baltimore. It was a private school. It was called the Calvert School. And it has been around for 100 years. And it does a lot of if parents wanted to go to the Bahamas or the Tahiti, the Calvert School had curriculum so that there was homeschooling, very good homeschooling. So they were in Baltimore, but they also had a very good homeschooling curriculum, which was very difficult, and very high standards. So there was an elementary school in Baltimore City, and the principal of the school said, I want to use these high standards of this white, she was African American, the school was African American, I want to use these high standards. And the superintendent in Baltimore City wouldn't let her use it for 3 years. He said, no, that's a white person's curriculum, we're not going to use it for our kids. It won't be appropriate for us. And she kept fighting. And it was a big issue, as you can imagine, in Baltimore. And it was on the front page of the paper day after day after day. And finally, the superintendent was fired because he wouldn't let her use this curriculum. She used it for 3 years. And the kids who traditionally had scored at like 25%, their scores went up to about 75%. Now, they didn't score as well as the white kids in the private school, which were like 95%. One of my daughters actually went to this school, hated it. She said, Mommy, that was the biggest mistake you ever made, sending me to this horrible school. Because it was horrible in one sense. It was very strict, and it was very... But it helped those kids, right? And they went up to the 75th percentile. Okay, so now if you were a principal in Baltimore City and you saw that how well the kids had done on this curriculum, wouldn't you think you'd call up and say, I want to use it? Mm-hmm. Not one other principal in the city called up and said, I want to use this really good curriculum. Not one. Because at that point, we didn't have this testing about whether schools would be judged on whether they did well. And I happened to be at lunch during this controversy with a guy who had been very much involved with the civil rights movement. He was very close to Martin Luther King. And I described this story to him, and he said, one of the problems that we face is that a lot of teachers say, well, I can't teach these kids. They come from bad families, they come from drug-addicted problems, their fathers aren't there, so it's not my fault that they don't learn. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you have standardized, and that's not true, because these kids did learn when the principal, I mean, they didn't learn as well, but they still went up to 75%. So if you don't have standardized tests, This isn't true with all teachers, but there is the danger that you blame the kids for not succeeding and not yourself. I know that story probably didn't go over well with everybody here, but that's been my experience. And that's why I think, I actually have also said that I think experiential learning will make you do better on standardized tests, because you'll learn more and you'll be more interested. So I believe in standardized tests and experiential education, which is kind of putting two things that are together, which are not normally thought together, but that's what I think, yeah.
Having grown up with standardized testing, I really don't think it's good, like with the tax test, because teachers for the 5 years that I went to school here in Nacogdoches, all they wanted to do was teach us something so that we could pass the tax test so the school could get money.
Yeah.
So I think that we don't need that kind of standardized testing. Maybe if there was a different way you could do it, because I don't think I learned anything extra in high school and got my full learning experience because of the tax test.
Yeah, look, I've heard that a lot, and that's why I said I think that's what I really like about what you're doing, at least in elementary education here at SFA. You have a very experiential learning. You're individually, it's really a terrific way, and I think that's the best kind of learning. And I think people will do well on the test, and I think it's unfortunate that people think that the only way you're going to do well on the test is drill. And so I'm very sympathetic to that, but I've also had that other experience I just told you. So, I think that it's tough. It's tough. I mean, look, where I went to school, when I went to high school, we didn't have tests. We didn't have grades. Very nice. We had a lot of experiential learning, but we were all extremely motivated. And, one of the challenges you face is how do you motivate? I mean, somebody said to me yesterday, one of the students said, oh, our class, the teachers aren't motivated. They don't like us. Remember that at dinner last night? And so one of the things is, how do you get teachers to love their students and to really get excited about their students? And part of it has to do with paying people well, mentoring them well, loving them. It's not just pay, because a lot of teachers work at private schools at less pay than public schools, but they feel that they are respected. And so part of this has to go with, how do you respect people? How do you honor them? And that, I think, would help alleviate part of the problem.
Do you think they also need to work on making class sizes smaller?
That's an interesting question. I've seen studies that show that what's most important is a good teacher, not the size of the class. I went to class, and well, you can say, what have I learned? But my class, we had 45 kids in my first, second, third grade class. Now, we had a nun, and she did give us the threat of hell if we didn't obey. So if you don't have that, maybe you need a smaller class.
Considering...
Yes.
Considering countries such as China has a very great literacy rate, what is your take on our foreign policy, considering that most of Americanized views are within military, and as far as political views when you talk about foreign policy, what is your opinion as far as considering education and foreign policy and looking at other countries to bring back programs such as STEM that are doing great in other countries?
Yeah. No, actually, I'm glad you asked that question. I am now a special assistant at the State Department. And part of my job there is to get students to come from Latin America to study in North America, and to get students from North America to study in Latin America. Brazil, for instance, just to give you an example, just the difference between what Brazil is. Brazil says, we have the best resources in the world. We have forests, we have coal, we have gold. We have, I don't know, I'm making up all the resources. I don't really know all the resources they have. You can check me on that. But they have a lot of resources. Their biggest trading partner is China. And they said, we have a lot going on. We have a growth rate, till just recently, of about 8%. We're doing really well. What is holding us back? Education. And they have, now Brazil is funding scholarships for 100,000 students from Brazil to study STEM in either North America or Europe, because they understand that we need to do that. The United States government is also trying to send 100,000 students to China, because we realize that the Chinese are learning English. All the top Chinese know English. The recent premier who was just elected actually studied in Iowa. Did you know that? Pretty cool, huh? But we are not sending students abroad in the same way. Because Americans think we're the best, and why should we go abroad? So many American students, unlike European, Chinese, South American students, stay at home and therefore don't know the rest of the world very well. So your question is an excellent one, and we'd have to do a much better job of getting American students. And I was hoping, I've talked to your president and your glorious First Lady and Janice, to say that I think SFA should be a leader in study abroad. Okay, you want to move on to something else? Yes, or does somebody have a question?
I had a question before you move on.
Where are you?
Right here.
Oh, there. Oh, my friend. We talked earlier.
Yeah. It just touches, like, because I know you're a big advocate of equality and, like, civil rights. I know you've also been all over the country, and with the United States being, like, probably the most diverse country in the world, would you say we've gotten to a point to where it's very equal all around every spectrum? Because me being at this level, I'm in college, I work, and I interact socially outside of those too. And I don't see inequality. I only see poor versus rich. You know, that's the only inequality I can ever see. Everywhere else, I feel like we filled that void. And if so, if there still is really equality as far as America goes, that I'm just not witnessing, where is that?
Oh, yeah. If you're saying, is there a lot of inequality?
Where is it? Like, is it between races? Is it between genders? Because I don't witness that firsthand, and I'm
good for you
here in this. Yeah.
You know, again, I don't know enough about your own personal experience, but if you look at across the country, I'll just give you an example in mortgage lending. That is, if you want to get a house. If you are African American and poor, you tend to pay a higher cost for mortgages than if you're rich. So you get the poor are subsidizing the rich. That's wrong. It's just, there was an article about that just the other day. If you look at where there are a lot of tax cuts, tax breaks in the tax code. Most of those tax codes go to the rich because they're the ones that are making the money. And so, for instance, in healthcare, if you are working for a large company, you can deduct your healthcare costs. But if you're a single person, you can't as well. So it's more difficult. So there's a large, what we do in the United States is the lobbyists basically help those who are well off and not those who are less well off. And there's a large, and that's a big problem because for a country to be successful, you really need a strong middle class. That's what you need. Having just a few rich people is like South America. They live in gated communities, and that's not a healthy way for a country to go forward. You know, Henry Ford was famous for when he started to pay his workers more. Do you remember that story? Why did he pay his workers more? Because he said, if I don't pay them more, they won't be able to afford a car. So why are we trying to reduce the wages of people rather than increase the wages? And so what's happening now is that we need to have a cultural change in this country that gets away from the American dream is only about how much money you make, and about the American dream is having as many people as possible be able to work hard and be part of the middle class. And if you talk about the American dream, ask people what they mean by it. Do they mean the ability to get as rich as possible, or do they mean to have a country in which we have a strong middle class? And that's what clearly I think we need, a strong middle class, because it's just, it's economically, it makes much more sense. You have more people who are able to produce and to feel good, because work makes you feel better. What do you think of that? Yes, thank you very much. Okay. Should we go on? Do you want to go on to something else? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so energy. Some of you asked about energy, and some of you may have come to my talk, and I talked about how we are on the cusp of this incredible energy boom in the United States, which is very exciting in a number of ways. The fracking and the natural gas and the oil will allow, let me tell you the good part about it first, because it's very exciting. It will mean that in the United States will be energy independent, which will help our balance of payments. We won't have to spend so much money buying oil from dictators like in the Middle East or in Venezuela. And it also means that we'll have more tax dollars that come in for our government, so you'll reduce the deficit. It means that we won't have to go to war over oil as we did with Iraq, which, Alan Greenspan, head of the Federal Reserve, said that whole war was over oil. And if you think of your friends and your family members who were hurt in that war because of oil, you'd say it's really nice that we have a much more energy strength here in the United States. So that's the good news. The bad news and the tough news, and natural gas is very frankly much less polluting than is oil or coal. I think coal is probably on the way out, and that's also very good news, because we do not want to send more pollution into the environment, because it will have terrible impacts on the environment, as you've seen with Sandy, with drought here, with earthquakes. I've heard that you now have earthquakes here in Nacogdoches that you didn't used to have. Did you know that? I mean, these are, when you start attacking the earth is going to attack back. Actually, I won't tell you that story. You'll think I'm such a nut. But so we need to change, and that's why I love visiting the biofuels plant, which is saying we are trying to be energy efficient and self-sufficient based on renewable resources of energy. And I think that's what we need to move towards. That's because that's the way that we're going to preserve our planet. America is a very rich country. We're going to be able to rebuild parts of, Manhattan and New Jersey. But there are other parts of the world that don't have those abilities, and they are drowning. And thousands of people in India have been killed from earthquakes and from rivers overflowing. And so we need to care about our planet. And I'm glad you asked, and I think we need to care about our planet as an economic reason, and we need to do it as a matter of faith. God gave us this planet to care for, and we should care for it. And we've also got the issues that somebody very smartly raised in these questions that said, well, India, many parts of the world want to use more energy now because they're getting richer. And as you get richer, you want to turn the lights on at night. And so, and have air conditioning and all the things that we enjoy. And so there's going to be a great need for more energy, but there's also, and if we do the STEM, there's lots of new inventions of how we can get energy in a much more environmentally safe way. Using solar-powered cells in remote parts of the world. They're getting television, they're getting electricity. It's not as reliable as what we've done, but I think there is a change coming, and it will come more, the United States is actually one of the weirdest countries in the world. We're like 45th in taxing carbon. I think we should have a tax on trash, because I think we need to change our culture. And right now, the way we do our taxes, this is kind of off topic, but we tax work. If you work, you're taxed for your Social Security and your Medicare. So it's more expensive to work, and I think that we should make it more expensive to use energy. So Because I like work. I think work is really important. I think it makes you feel good and makes you take care of your family, and it solves a lot of problems that people have. A lot of people get depressed when they don't work. Yes?
Right now, the U.S. uses the GDP, as you mentioned, as some other countries. Do you think we should go for the GPI, or the Genuine Progress Indicator, that measures environmental impact? Because of certain refineries, they may pay a small tax or fee for, say, carbon, but that's not the actual overall impact that they're making with their pollution.
Yeah, I don't know if you're there's a number of countries around the world now, that say we should do a different way of measuring how we should measure how well we're doing. What we've traditionally used is the GDP, gross national product, GNP. But it measures a lot of things that really doesn't mean that it's helpful to us. It measures, as my father eloquently said, the knives, the guns that kill us. Why is that good for us? Or it measures the ambulances that take us to the hospital. Or it measures the things that we really don't want, or the depletion of our resources. So some people around the world have said we need a new measurement. For instance, President Sarkozy of France has said we need a new measurement, and he brought together 5 Nobel Prize economists, and they came up with a measurement that included, number 1, the GDP, plus the depletion of resources, plus happiness. And there's a whole group of people who are looking at measuring happiness. In fact, I was invited for the last 2 years to go to Italy because there's a province in Italy that has a conference on happiness. And there's a Nobel Prize winner economist that measures happiness. Remember I talked about Copenhagen and how they have free health care, they pay you to go to college, they have high taxes, but they give you a lot for those taxes, and they're the happiest country in the world. So the question is, do you want to have good health care, good education, and then you have to pay high taxes, but you get something for it? And we've been told that that would be bad. I know President Obama was very interested in it, but he was afraid that if he pushed it too much, that people would say he's not interested in economic growth. And when we were in such financial dire straits, he stopped paying attention. But he loved that quote from my father. Does anybody have one last comment?
Could you just address how the 24/7 news media has totally skewed what you have just commented on? I mean, there are a lot of people in the room who love what you're saying, but they won't believe a word of it.
Okay, I have a question. How many of you believe a word of what I said? That's good. I'm just going to end with that story. This is as you know, and this is really important for you as students, there have been now studies that show that if you believe something and you're told a fact that is opposite of what you believe, rather than believe that fact, you believe what you thought was right, even more so. People don't like to be told they're wrong. Surprise. So the question for you in education is not to cling deeply to any deep belief, because you really will close your eyes to what's going on. And I'm going to end with my story about religion, okay? My Rick Warren story, which I didn't tell you earlier, but it is in my book, and I think it's a very interesting story. So there's a minister named Rick Warren, and he wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life, which was on the bestseller list for 5 years. It sold 30 million copies, which, for those of you who don't know about books, is a whole lot of books, okay? Very popular writer. Very, very popular. So I was writing this book in which, as you can see, I thought people should focus on caring for the poor, the sick, the homeless, the helpless, the people who need help. And I think that's what our religion, at least my religion, taught me. So I read his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and it was about how you can improve yourself in 40 days. And it's all about how you can improve you. It's all about me and your relationship to God. That's what the whole book is about. It's about nobody else, which I thought was rather self-centered. It is. So I went to see him because I had heard he'd changed, and I listened to his sermon, and I went out to see it. It's a great place. They have a stream running through his place, and you press a button and cross it. It becomes dry, so you cross it like the Red Sea. I can tell you a lot of stories about it. It's really very cool. So anyway, after I went and I talked to him, and I said, you know, I read your book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and it's all about me. It's about nobody else. You know, well, that's not what's in the Bible. And he didn't say this because I said it, but he had figured it out a couple of years before. He said, yeah, I have to repent. I was a minister, he said, for 35 years, and I missed the 2,500 passages in the Bible that told me that I should care about the poor and the sick and the homeless and helpless. I didn't see it. I just didn't see it. And then he said, also, Kathleen, I'm in Orange County. It's a pretty nice county. I didn't see people poor here either, to your point. Now, there are a lot of poor people in Orange County, but if you don't want to see things, you don't see them. You just don't. And he describes, and I'm going to just go on for just a minute longer because I think it's a great story. Obviously, I think it's a great story, so I'm telling you. So I talked to his wife, who had grown up as the wife of, or not grown up, but she was the wife of this great preacher, and she had been told that if you had AIDS, it was a result of your sinfulness. Anybody who had AIDS was obviously a sinner. That's what she believed. And then she saw the cover of Time magazine in which there were children with AIDS in the United States and in Africa. And she thought, wait a minute, these kids didn't sin. How could it be that God is punishing them for a sin when they didn't sin? And she was flummoxed by that because it went against everything she believed. So she described to me how she put the magazine down because she hated it, and then she started crying, and she looked at it again, and she said, oh, that doesn't make sense. And she looked at it again, and she said, it doesn't make sense. And she said, well, wait a minute, I must be wrong. These kids haven't been sinners. So she got interested in helping people with AIDS. And at that point, her husband, the minister, still hadn't read the 2,500 passages from the Bible, and said to his wife, don't you bring your AIDS issues to my church. You do your own thing, but don't bring it to me. Ouch. And then finally he got religion. And he changed. And I tell you that because each of us grows up in certain families, and I left that meeting with her and her husband thinking, what don't I see? What don't I see because of my growing up? We're all products of our experience and what we want to see. And so I wish you the best. You're at a great university. I hope that you'll open your hearts and your minds to other experiences. You may come back to believe what you saw at the beginning was right. But remember the story of Rick Warren and his wife. They saw things that they had never believed before, and it was right in front of their faces. Good luck. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.